Welcome to Ciao, Living Italian Style. I'm your host, Barbara Ann Zippi, and usually I bring you escapades of my adventures in Abruzzo. But today we're going to head a little further south to the region of Puglia, where the photographer for Padre Pio, where I met with Elia Stelluto, the photographer for Padre Pio during Elia's lifetime. And I met Elia. You'll see him, Elia Stelluto, Padre Pio's historian photographer. And on the left is Harry Calandra. Many of our listeners were taped at the Radnor Studios in Wayne, Mainline TV. And not far from there is located the Center for Padre Pio in Bartow, which was founded by Harry Calandra and his wife. So I had the pleasure of meeting Harry Calandra. Elia is next to me with the bright pink jacket, and Elia's sister Maria Stelluto. And we were outside. Next picture, now we're inside D'Angelo's restaurant in Center City, Philadelphia, near Rittenhouse Square, and that's Chef Tony D'Angelo. And on the right is Harry's daughter Julia, and she's our special guest today, Julia Calandra-Lineberg. And the next picture that we had, and then that is Elia and Count Sebastiano Capone, who represents his vineyards from Florence, Villa Calcinaya, and you can find them online. And anyway, let's get back to our guest and our special interviews that I had on one of my recent trips to Italy with Elia. So welcome, Julia, to Ciao Bella Living Italian Style. It's good to have you here today.
It's good to be back, Barbara. I'm always happy to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to see that you're now Chief Development Officer of the Saint Pio Foundation.
The Saint Pio Foundation in Tuckahoe, New York, yes. And we're doing wonderful, wonderful things promoting Padre Pio throughout the United States. It's very exciting.
Italy too, really.
And in Italy, yes, indeed, we're affiliated there.
It's wonderful that you're working with them because you have had such a personal experience, not only with Harry Calandra, who is your father. So you lived through the miracle of your mother and father. It was your family. You also have had the pleasure of knowing Elia since you were a child, which I want to ask you about. And now you're spreading the gospel about Padre Pio outside of Bartow and actually all through the United States and Italy. So that's so exciting.
It is very exciting. A new chapter where we are actually bringing Padre Pio to the people that may never ever have the opportunity to visit San Giovanni as do you, or any place. Yes. And they are so excited and overwhelmed at the beautiful initiative of venerating Padre Pio's authentic relics and learning about him.
So we're premiering this in May of 2024, Julia, which is a special time in Padre Pio's life.
Yes, May of 2024, the 2nd of May specifically, is the 25th anniversary of Padre Pio's beatification. And it's amazing to think 25 years ago he was beatified. And everyone was so excited. It was the largest beatification in the history of sainthood. It
is amazing because having had the opportunity through getting introduced by you, again, after those pictures, original pictures were in 2015, I think. And so 2024, this past year, in February, I got to go visit Elia at his home as a 90-year-old handsome gentleman. Wonderful visit. But you actually got to know this. Now, for our listeners out there, I have to tell you that Elia Stelluto got to know Padre Pio when he was only a young boy, that Julie's going to fill us in on those stories. And he actually was a photographer by trade, and all through his life in the village, he has been and still is Padre Pio's personal historian and photographer. But Julia, I met him as, 15 years ago as a 75-year-old man, but just these past few months as a 90-year-old, energetic, full of life gentleman. But you knew him as when you were a young girl.
Yes, I first met him in 1970. I was in San Giovanni in 69, but we met Elia in 1970. And he was energetic, he was very well known, and he was someone who was just so outgoing and wanted to talk about Padre Pio. He too had this gift that he wanted to share Padre Pio, and he had, having been the student of Federico Abresch, who had one of the only cameras, per se, professional cameras in all of San Giovanni Rotondo, he was mentored by this Federico Abresch.
Maybe we could find some of that video. Can you run one of those videos, Kevin?
So it would be wonderful to see that, because he had a special gift, and this is how God makes things work for us, Barbara. We would never have known Padre Pio or seen any of these incredible photographs because he was under obedience to never be photographed professionally without permission. And this was a Vatican obedience. So no photographer was allowed to photograph Padre Pio. Forbidden.
Right.
However, I was going to say, however, Elia was a child when he was being mentored. And as a child, there were no restrictions against him. And I know you have a very charming video.
Padre Pio. Lei aveva accesso alla camera di Padre Pio.
Sì,
Quindi lei
giorno.
ci poteva andare.
Lei aveva la chiave del convento. Entravo e uscivo quando volevo.
Sì, I understand.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
Non era la persona estranea al convento. Io era, vuol dire, da bambino fosse la mascotte del convento. Ecco, la mettevo su questo aspetto qui. Era il ragazzino che la macchina fotografica, capito? Non è che aveva la chiave. Io avevo come fosse vivessi in convento. Ecco, questa è la cosa.
Quindi lei l'andava a visitare tutti i giorni, e l'andava a vedere tutti i giorni, Padre Pio.
Quella
To
fotografia.
leave San Giovanni was about 16 in that picture.
And then the picture that he's pointing to in the bed with Padre Pio in the bed.
Yes, he was able to take that photograph. That's a photograph when Padre Pio was dying, actually, in 1959. And Elia has photographs of the statue of the Madonna of Fatima, who was visiting, the Pilgrim Virgin.
Right.
And they were inspired as the Madonna was leaving San Giovanni. The helicopter pilot said, something made me go back. And he went around the convento, and Padre Pio was lifted from his bed by the friars so that he could get to the window to say goodbye to Our Lady. And Elia is explaining that just as the Madonna was leaving, Padre Pio cried out, "Mother, you came and I am dying, and you leave me this way." And he shuddered and collapsed. And the very next day, he was out of his bed and dressed and waiting to go and offer Mass as though there was nothing wrong with him. And the doctors had diagnosed him with a case of lung cancer, that he was very, very ill.
Amazing that that studio and him hearing those stories firsthand. The pictures in his studio are all his photographs, and through the years, and to sit there and hear him, and I have to give credit because the other voice in that picture is my cousin Simona Nobilio with my limited Italian, very limited Italian. She came. Now here's the pictures of his studio in the little town of San Giovanni Rotondo, and each of those black leather straps in the middle on either side of him, you pull them out and there's numerous photos of his collection through the years. He was a photographer by trade, as a profession, and he had a wonderful display of years of his photography equipment through that was a little history museum in itself, you know. Mm-hmm. And then the flash was invented when he was a young boy.
The flash at that time,
Talk about the flash.
enormous, and he was only about 8 or 9 years old when he started photographing Padre Pio, and with this enormous flash, he couldn't hold the enormous camera. What was done to him was they put leather straps on him, and they strapped this flash to him as he carried this camera. So here's this little 8.5-year-old boy walking around with this huge equipment until he was able to get Padre Pio in just the right pose in the church. And then all of a sudden, in this dark church, he took the shot. The flash exploded. Padre Pio was actually startled by the flash because it was so dark in the church. And
it was when he turned around to do the blessing with his stigmata.
With his hand held, and that's when he took the photograph.
Now, famous picture.
The very famous picture of Padre Pio. And Padre Pio started yelling, "Who did that? Who did that?" And all of the ladies in the church who loved little Elia were angry with him and said, "Oh, you hurt Padre Pio, you hurt Padre Pio." But immediately after the Mass, and Elia went to talk to Padre Pio, and Padre Pio forgave him. And he says, "Elia, I didn't know it was you." And that's when he told him, "My son, promise me you'll never use a flash again in the church. You'll never use a flash to take a picture of Padre Pio." And immediately this child's precociousness came right back because you experienced that being with him. And he looked and he says, "But Padre Pio, you're not a photographer. You don't know. You might be a good priest, but you don't know how to take a picture. I need to take a flash, especially you want to say Mass at 4 o'clock in the morning with no electricity, only candles."
Right.
Padre Pio was taken aback. He was always charmed by Elia. And he looked at him and he said, "Elia, do you trust Padre Pio?" And Elia said, "Yes." Then he said, "No flash."
Right, and it is a wonderful story hearing him say that, because his professor, to get that picture of the stigmata, was willing to pay him quite a bit of money for that photo.
Well, it was a magazine that was paying Albrecht to get that.
Yes.
And after Elia recounted what happened to him, they both said, "We don't care how much money they pay. We will not sell that
photograph." And he
photograph.
still says to this day they never got a dime. Now, this is the rest of part of his studio. The rest,
Yes,
it's a
and you see
beautiful
that
place,
beautiful
and you
photograph.
can see the stigmata picture of when Padre Pio would say Mass with his hand in the air, and then that's the Capuchin friar.
Do you see that photograph right there?
Yes.
The one with Elia and Padre Pio.
Yes, this one.
Elia was just called by his family to move to Argentina.
Yes, I
So
remember
he went to say goodbye to Padre Pio. That's why, and he asked, "Can I have a photograph?" And he had to go down into a common area to take a photograph. He was not allowed to take it in the room, no access. But it was at that moment that everything came, and Elia understood why Padre Pio said, "Do you trust me?" It was because he embraced Elia, and Padre Pio embraced no one because we know of the wounds on his body. And at the moment that he embraced, Elia was surrounded by such a beautiful light, and it was revealed at that moment that Padre Pio had the gift of inner illumination, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And it dawned on Elia, no wonder I could take pictures of Padre Pio in the dark with
Without
no
a
lights, because he illuminated the photographs.
It is just amazing to hear the stories associated
And the miracles
with
that this man lived through. You said it yourself when you were there.
He walked beside a saint and witnessed firsthand miracles as a young boy. It was amazing. Well, this is the picture of Padre Pio on his deathbed that Elia, of course he had the keys to come and go as he pleased. He did say in one of the video interviews that Padre Pio was the closest thing that he had to a father.
Yes.
And then you have here, I bought a couple of his books and videos, and I asked him to sign them. it was such a special day. And that was another cabinet in the studio filled with, so many different Padre Pio memorabilia that he's collected through the years or that were given to him. Now, this is Elia giving Simona directions on how to pose the camera so she could get the best shot. And always giving directions. This is with me, but he was telling Simona how to do it. And the studio was just, and here is my cousin Simona Nobilio. She was wonderful. We had a wonderful, wonderful private visit with him. So, when you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, and we're going to look at some of the outside pictures of the San Giovanni, they never had all this to show to pilgrims. But when I went up the mountain, you have to drive up a mountain through dirt paths, cobblestones in 2024. So imagine what it was like in the 1940s, after World War II, when Elia was a young boy.
Before the war, Elia was an altar boy for Padre Pio. And because of the obediences and the studies being done on Padre Pio, the restrictions upon him were grave, and his Mass would begin at 4 o'clock in the morning. And you have some footage that is very, very important when Elia explained 4 o'clock in the morning, meaning we had to be up at 3 and start our trek, because San Giovanni Rotondo was literally 2.5 kilometers, about a mile away from the friary.
Right, right.
And there was no road there. And it was all cobblestone and rock. And they had a very treacherous climb because it was dark. There was no electricity. And they walked, he, along with many pilgrims, along that little donkey path to get up to that solitary little friary before that entire complex was grown after. And when you were talking about the 1940s, when our soldiers first learned about Padre Pio and they came in their jeeps, they're the ones that built the road because they couldn't get their jeeps and trucks up there. It was, the jeeps could go, the trucks carrying all the soldiers that wanted to attend Padre Pio's Mass, that they voluntarily went up there and built that road so that people could take it.
It is amazing, the access. We have some pictures of the outsides and even some of the rooms. Let's see, this is the square. The hospital would be on your right, and the church is on your left.
The entrance of the Way of the Cross.
Right.
Goes through the mountains.
Right.
That's the hospital.
That's the hospital that this town was rubble. This town was on the top of a hill. Beautiful, mountain, really. Mountain, not a hill. It's a mountain. And that Padre Pio and Elia watched that hospital being built from a dirt field and took pictures of it.
The original friary entrance.
Of where the Padre Pio lived.
Yes.
And, this gave the information. And at the top is the window, I believe, right? Or at the bottom to the left of the door is Padre Pio's window.
Well, right above that doorway would be the choir loft, and Padre Pio would look out that window onto the piazza to bless all of the people that were outside. Right.
Now, when you go in, of course, the shrine is there. So this is also some beautiful artwork.
Yes.
Magnificent.
This is a museum that was constructed to kind of join the buildings together and display a lot of the memorabilia.
And this piece of wood, I went in and everybody can carve their name. I think the next one, I did a close-up. I don't know when I have to make a return visit to see if I could still find my name there, And what else do we have? Oh, the petitions that you can leave, of course, are mind-blowing. Padre Pio miracles still go on today. And then you have, this was one of the confessionals, right, Julia?
Yep, and it's located in the sacristy of the old church. And that was in the area where Padre Pio would pass when he would leave the convento to go into the church to get ready for the Mass, into the original
And there actually
church.
is, you could see, up here we go with, these are letters.
All letters from all over the world that people had written to Padre Pio, and that's only a sampling of them.
Yes, yes. And they are professing their miracles. So this was overwhelming to see this display inside. And then we have the relics here
Yes.
of Padre Pio's clothing, which they've done a beautiful job. His chair.
From the last Mass.
And
Some of the vestments that were worn during his Masses, and the altar cloths.
yes.
And that it looks to me like an undershirt.
I think it
of
was
Padre
the
Pio.
undershirt that had some of the blood
stains on it,
markings
yes.
on it, yes, yes. Now here's a picture of the room. We showed you a picture of the room earlier, but you could see that that was
yes.
the picture. But the picture before that shows the plexiglass
Over.
in front of the entrance to the room. So you actually got to see Padre Pio's furniture and the small
And that
quarters.
was the bed that was in that photograph that Elia took when Padre Pio was lying there in
at the end.
1959.
Yes, yes. It was an amazing journey
Yes,
there. That's
there it
the
is.
bed that was in that room. Yes, yes. It was amazing the access that Elia had to Padre Pio, and here is, you could see that each different priest at the friary had their own little entranceways, and this was an entranceway into another room. And look at those crowds, Julia. I don't know how the people got up the mountain.
Yes.
Really, that was an outside service in the 60s.
Yes, this was at one of the dedication of the hospital in 1958, and you can see that the crowds extend all the way up to the Friary Church. The crowds extended all the way back before they could fall off the cliff to the next road.
I mean,
it was
pilgrims
absolutely
still
incredible.
flock there.
And where would they stay?
But oh my God, there was no place. Now you see Uber, you see cabs, you see hotels, you see restaurants. It's brought people so much economic development in that town.
Yes.
You know, has given people job opportunities. I wanted to, we're going to do a part 1 and part 2 of this show. Because we still have a lot more to bring you about Padre Pio, and with Julia Calandra-Lineberg and the Saint Pio Foundation out of New York. So for now, on part 1, I'm going to close off and say thanks again to my guest, Julia. But it's not the end, because watch part 2 so we can learn more about the foundation. But also we have to tell you about so many more things about Padre Pio and where you might find a Padre Pio shrine in your area. Till we meet again, ciao Bella.